The CNN studios in Manhattan buzzed with unusual energy as production assistants made final preparations for what promised to be one of the most watched interviews of the year. The network had secured an unprecedented joint appearance by Judge Judy, America's most famous television jurist, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the rising star of Democratic politics known for her devastating cross-examinations and thorough preparation. The occasion was CNN's special primetime series on justice and accountability in American institutions, and the producers had specifically requested both women to discuss the intersection of media, law, and public service. Judge Judy arrived at the studio with the commanding presence that had made her a household name for over 25 years. At 78 years old, she moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a public confrontation and believed herself untouchable due to her massive popularity and carefully cultivated image as America's straight-talking arbiter of common sense. Her sharp business suit and trademark stern expression projected an authority that had intimidated countless litigants and impressed millions of viewers who saw her as the embodiment of no-nonsense justice. She had agreed to this appearance because she genuinely believed it would provide another platform to showcase her wisdom and moral authority to a national audience. Jasmine entered the studio with her characteristic preparation and focus, carrying a leather portfolio that seemed unusually thick for what was supposed to be a standard television interview. Her research into Judge Judy's background had uncovered information that went far beyond the carefully managed public persona. Information that would ultimately expose one of the most shocking financial scandals in television history. She had initially planned to keep the discussion focused on judicial ethics and media responsibility, but Judge Judy's increasingly aggressive comments about congressional oversight and democratic accountability had convinced her that a more direct confrontation might be necessary to reveal important truths about accountability and privilege. The first segment of the interview proceeded along expected lines, with host Anderson Cooper facilitating a discussion about the role of television in shaping public understanding of the legal system. Judge Judy delivered polished sound bites about personal responsibility, respect for authority, and the importance of swift justice that had made her famous. Her responses carried the weight of someone who had spent decades believing her own publicity and genuinely saw herself as a moral authority figure rather than an entertainer who happened to work in a courtroom setting. Jasmine's initial responses were measured and thoughtful, focusing on the importance of actual legal training, constitutional protections, and the danger of reducing complex legal issues to entertainment sound bites. Her expertise in constitutional law was evident in every answer, and even Judge Judy seemed grudgingly impressed by her command of legal principles and policy details, though her competitive nature prevented her from acknowledging this directly. The turning point came when Cooper asked about congressional oversight of judicial institutions and whether elected officials were qualified to question judicial decisions and legal procedures. Judge Judy's response revealed the arrogance and contempt for democratic accountability that had been building throughout her decades of unchallenged television authority. Frankly, Anderson, I'm concerned about politicians like Congresswoman Crockett who think their law degrees and elected positions give them the authority to question institutions and individuals who have spent decades actually practicing law and delivering justice, she said, her voice carrying the same dismissive tone she used with difficult litigants. Too many of these congressional types are more interested in grandstanding and political theater than understanding how the real world actually works. They lack the practical experience and, frankly, the legal competence to question people who have dedicated their lives to justice. The studio fell silent at the unprecedented personal attack. While aggressive exchanges were common in political interviews, Judge Judy's dismissive language crossed clear lines of professional courtesy and revealed a level of arrogance that shocked even experienced television observers. Cooper leaned forward, recognizing that the interview had shifted into much more dangerous territory than anyone had anticipated. Jasmine's response was calm, but carried an undercurrent that suggested she was moving into a more aggressive mode. Judge Scheindlin, I find your comments about legal competence and real-world experience particularly interesting. given your own background and business practices. Since you've raised questions about qualifications and practical experience, perhaps we should examine those concepts more closely as they apply to your own career and financial conduct. She reached into her portfolio and withdrew what appear to be official government documents marked with IRS letterheads. I'm particularly curious about your definition of justice and accountability, especially when it comes to civic responsibilities like paying taxes and contributing to the society that has made your success possible. Judge Judy's confident expression flickered slightly as she sensed that something was wrong, but her decades of television dominance had made her believe she was untouchable regardless of what accusations might be leveled against her. I'm not sure what you're implying, Congresswoman, but my financial affairs are completely in order and have been reviewed by the best accountants and tax attorneys money can buy. Have they? Jasmine opened the first document and turned it so the cameras could capture the official IRS seal and documentation. Because according to these Internal Revenue Service investigation documents, your tax affairs represent one of the most sophisticated tax evasion schemes in entertainment industry history. The silence in the CNN studio was complete as viewers across America processed what they were hearing. Judge Judy, the woman who had spent decades lecturing others about responsibility and following the law, was being accused of massive tax evasion by someone who clearly had access to official government documentation. Cooper struggled to maintain his professional composure while processing the magnitude of what was being revealed on live television. What you're looking at, Jasmine continued, holding up the IRS document for the cameras, is a preliminary report from a 3-year federal investigation into Judge Judy's financial activities. The investigation has uncovered a complex network of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and fraudulent deductions that have allowed her to evade approximately $95 million in federal taxes over the past 15 years. The gasps that filled the studio were audible throughout the CNN building. Judge Judy sat frozen in her chair, her face cycling through emotions of shock, fear, and what appeared to be recognition that her carefully protected financial secrets were being exposed in the most public forum possible. The authority and moral superiority that had defined her public persona for decades was crumbling in real time before a national television audience. But Jasmine was just beginning her systematic destruction of Judge Judy's credibility and moral authority. She produced a second document, this one showing detailed financial transactions and account information. This investigation began when IRS auditors noticed that despite earning over $400 million from her television show, Judge Judy's reported taxable income was suspiciously low. Further investigation revealed that she had been routing her income through a network of offshore entities in countries with bank secrecy laws and no tax treaties with the United States. Judge Judy's attempts to respond were increasingly desperate and incoherent as the evidence mounted against her. Those allegations are completely false and represent a politically motivated attack designed to damage my reputation and undermine public confidence in law and order. Actually, Judge Scheinlin, these aren't allegations. Jasmine produced additional documents that appear to be bank records and corporate filings. These are documented financial transactions showing how you established shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, and Switzerland to hide income from the IRS. The records show that you claim to be a resident of multiple countries for tax purposes while actually living in your New York and Florida mansions. The studio audience was in complete shock as the scope of Judge Judy's alleged financial crimes became clear. This wasn't just tax avoidance. It was systematic tax evasion on a massive scale by someone who had built her career on lecturing others about following the law and accepting responsibility for their actions. The hypocrisy was staggering and represented a complete betrayal of the trust millions of viewers had placed in her moral authority. But Jasmine's most devastating revelation was still to come. She reached into her portfolio again and produced what appeared to be transcripts of recorded conversations marked with FBI surveillance stamps. There's something else the American people should know about Judge Judy's commitment to law and order. These are transcripts from FBI surveillance of conversations between Judge Judy and tax haven specialists discussing strategies for avoiding federal tax obligations while maintaining the appearance of legal compliance. The transcripts revealed Judge Judy's actual attitude toward the law and her responsibilities as an American citizen, and it was completely at odds with everything she had preached to television audiences for decades. In the recorded conversations, she could be heard expressing contempt for tax obligations and discussing various illegal strategies for hiding income from federal authorities. Most damaging was her recorded statement that regular people are suckers for paying taxes when there are so many ways to avoid them if you're smart enough. Cooper attempted to give Judge Judy an opportunity to respond to the mounting evidence against her. Judge Scheindlin, these are extremely serious allegations involving federal tax crimes. How do you respond to this evidence? Judge Judy's response was a desperate attempt to deflect responsibility and attack the credibility of the investigation. This is clearly a politically motivated hit job designed to destroy someone who has spent decades teaching Americans about personal responsibility and respect for law and order. These documents are probably fabricated, and even if they're real, they represent legitimate tax planning strategies that are available to any American citizen. Legitimate tax planning? Jasmine produced yet another document, this one appearing to be a criminal referral from the IRS to the Department of Justice. Judge Scheindlin, the IRS doesn't refer cases for criminal prosecution when they involve legitimate tax planning. They refer cases when they find evidence of willful tax evasion, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. She held up the document so the cameras could capture the official seals and signatures. This criminal referral recommends that you be prosecuted for tax evasion, conspiracy, money laundering, and making false statements to federal investigators. The potential penalties include up to 20 years in federal prison and forfeiture of all assets involved in the criminal scheme. The studio erupted into chaos as the full magnitude of Judge Judy's legal jeopardy became clear. She wasn't just facing civil tax penalties. She was looking at potential criminal prosecution that could result in significant prison time and the complete destruction of her financial empire. Court officers were standing by, apparently having been alerted that arrests might be necessary, depending on how the interview proceeded. Jasmine delivered her final statement with the gravity of someone who understood she was participating in a historic moment of accountability for public figures who had escaped scrutiny for too long. Judge Scheindlin, you came here tonight to question my legal competence and my understanding of how the real world works. You suggested that I lack the practical experience to question institutions and individuals who claim to represent justice and accountability. She gestured to the evidence spread across the interview table. The evidence shows that you have spent 15 years systematically evading your legal obligations while building a television empire based on lecturing others about following the law. You've hidden $95 million from the American people while telling struggling families that they need to take personal responsibility for their financial problems. Most importantly, you've used your platform as a fake judge to promote values and principles that you have never applied to your own conduct. The studio erupted in sustained applause from the production crew and audience members, with many people standing to acknowledge what they had witnessed. The applause continued for several minutes, representing not just approval of Jasmine's investigation, but recognition that they had witnessed a moment of genuine accountability for someone who had escaped scrutiny despite massive public influence and moral authority. Within hours of the CNN interview, Judge Judy announced that she was immediately suspending production of her television show and withdrawing from all public appearances pending resolution of the federal tax investigation. The IRS confirmed that they had been investigating her financial activities and that criminal charges were likely to be filed within days rather than weeks. Federal marshals executed search warrants at her multiple residences and business offices, seizing financial records and electronic devices as evidence in the criminal case. The immediate aftermath sent shockwaves through the television industry and raised fundamental questions about the accountability of media personalities who wielded enormous influence over public opinion. Judge Judy's show had been one of the most watched programs in television history, and her moral pronouncements had influenced millions of Americans' understanding of justice and personal responsibility. The revelation that she had been systematically breaking federal law while lecturing others about legal compliance represented a betrayal of public trust on an unprecedented scale. For the entertainment industry, Judge Judy's exposure represented a crisis of credibility that extended far beyond a single television personality. The scandal raised questions about how thoroughly networks investigated the backgrounds of their stars, and whether anyone was conducting oversight of personalities who claimed moral authority while potentially engaging in criminal activity. Industry executives began implementing enhanced background checks and financial audits for high-profile talent, understanding that the Judge Judy scandal had permanently changed audience expectations for authenticity and accountability. 3 months after the CNN interview, Judge Judy pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges, including tax evasion, conspiracy, and money laundering in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations into entertainment industry tax evasion schemes. Her cooperation led to additional investigations and revealed a network of tax evasion that extended throughout Hollywood and involved dozens of high-profile personalities who had been using similar offshore schemes to avoid their tax obligations. For Jasmine, the encounter represented another milestone in her career as an advocate for accountability and transparency in American institutions. Her decision to expose Judge Judy's criminal activity demonstrated her commitment to ensuring that no one, regardless of their popularity or perceived moral authority, was above the law. The success also reinforced her reputation as one of the most thorough and fearless oversight practitioners in contemporary American politics. But the victory came with significant personal costs and public criticism. Jasmine faced attacks from some observers who argued that she had destroyed a beloved cultural figure for political gain, while others praised her courage in exposing massive financial crimes that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. The broader impact on American culture was profound and lasting, as the Judge Judy scandal forced millions of Americans to reconsider their assumptions about celebrity moral authority and the relationship between public personas and private conduct. The case also highlighted the importance of investigative journalism and congressional oversight in exposing financial crimes by public figures who had used their platforms to escape scrutiny while potentially engaging in criminal activity. Without Jasmine's investigation and willingness to risk her reputation by confronting a beloved cultural icon, Judge Judy's tax evasion might have continued indefinitely while she continued to lecture Americans about legal compliance and personal responsibility. 6 months after Judge Judy's guilty plea and sentencing to 5 years in federal prison, the television industry had implemented comprehensive reforms designed to prevent similar scandals and ensure that media personalities claiming moral authority were held to appropriate standards of conduct. The reforms included regular financial audits, enhanced background investigations, and new protocols for reporting suspected criminal activity by high-profile talent. As both Jasmine and American media culture moved forward from the Judge Judy scandal, the lessons of that CNN evening remained as a reminder of the importance of holding public figures accountable regardless of their popularity or perceived moral authority. Jasmine had shown that thorough investigation and strategic courage could expose even the most carefully hidden criminal activity when individuals were willing to risk public criticism for the sake of justice and accountability. The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Judge Judy would be remembered as a defining moment in the ongoing struggle to maintain ethical standards and legal accountability for public figures who wielded enormous cultural influence while potentially engaging in criminal conduct behind their carefully crafted public personas.